The icy February wind howled across the Montana prairie, driving stinging crystals of snow that bit at Eliza Turner's tear-streaked face as she stumbled through the growing darkness. At 18 years old, 5 months pregnant, and with nothing but the clothes on her back and a small bundle of possessions clutched to her chest, she had never felt more alone in her life. The lights of her family's ranch house disappeared behind her, along with the only home she had ever known. Her father's final words still rang in her ears. "You've brought nothing but shame upon this family. You are no longer my daughter." The storm had come earlier than predicted, fierce and unforgiving. Eliza knew she wouldn't make it to the next town in these conditions. Her fingers had long since gone numb, and the biting cold penetrated her thin coat. The baby within her stirred as if sensing her distress. "Just a little longer," she whispered, her voice lost in the wind. "We'll find shelter soon." Through the curtain of white, she spotted the dark outline of a structure in the distance. Mustering her last reserves of strength, Eliza trudged toward it, praying it wasn't just a trick of the storm. As she drew nearer, relief washed over her as she recognized the unmistakable shape of a barn. She didn't care whose property she was trespassing on. She only knew she couldn't spend another minute in this killing cold. With trembling hands, she found the door and pushed it open just enough to slip inside. The sudden absence of wind felt like a blessing as she closed the door behind her. The barn was dark but mercifully warm, filled with the comforting smells of hay and livestock. A few horses nickered softly in their stalls, but otherwise, the barn was quiet. Eliza made her way to a pile of hay in the corner, collapsing onto it in exhaustion. Her whole body shook uncontrollably, and she curled around her swollen belly, trying to warm herself and her unborn child. "We'll be okay," she murmured, though she didn't quite believe it herself. She didn't have a plan beyond surviving the night. Tomorrow's problems would have to wait until tomorrow. Sleep came in fits and starts, her dreams haunted by her father's condemning face and her mother's silent tears. The pain of their rejection was still fresh, a wound that cut deeper than any physical discomfort. She had disgraced them, they said. An unmarried daughter with child was unforgivable in the eyes of God and their community. It didn't matter that the father of her child had promised to marry her before disappearing to seek his fortune in the gold fields. It didn't matter that she had been naive and in love. All that mattered was the shame she had brought to the Turner name. Eliza was jolted awake by the sound of the barn door creaking open. Light from a lantern spilled inside, and she instinctively shrank back into the shadows, her heart pounding. A tall figure stepped inside, stomping snow from his boots. "Hello," a deep voice called out. "I know someone's in here. My horses are all stirred up." Eliza remained silent, weighing her options. She could try to hide, but there weren't many places to go. And in her condition, she couldn't move quickly or quietly. The lantern light swept across the barn, eventually finding her huddled form in the hay. The man approached slowly, his boots crunching on the straw-covered floor. As he drew closer, Eliza could make out his features in the dim light, a strong jawline, weather-beaten skin, and concerned blue eyes beneath the brim of his hat. "Madam," he said, his voice gentler now. "Are you hurt?" Eliza tried to speak, but her teeth were chattering too hard to form words. She shook her head, then nodded, unsure of how to explain her situation. The man came closer, setting his lantern down. Now she could see him more clearly. He was younger than she'd first thought, perhaps in his mid-20s, with broad shoulders and a face that, while stern, held no immediate malice. "You're freezing," he observed, shrugging off his heavy coat without hesitation and draping it around her shoulders. The warmth of it, still carrying his body heat, was almost painful against her cold skin. "Tea, thank you," she managed to stammer. "Name's Ethan Ryder," he said, crouching down to her level. "This is my barn you found yourself in." "I'm sorry," Eliza said, clutching the coat around her. "I didn't mean to trespass. The storm, no need for apologies," he interrupted. "I wouldn't turn away a stray dog in weather like this, let alone." His eyes fell to her swollen belly, visible now even beneath the coat, and his expression shifted slightly. Not disgust or judgment as she had come to expect, but something more complex: surprise, certainly, and perhaps a flicker of concern. "You can't stay out here," he said decisively. "The house isn't much, but it's warm. Can you walk?" Eliza nodded, though she wasn't entirely sure. Her legs felt wooden and exhaustion pulled at every limb. Ethan must have seen her doubt because he offered his hand, strong and calloused from work. After a moment's hesitation, she took it, allowing him to help her to her feet. The world tilted alarmingly as she stood, and she swayed, light-headed from hunger and cold. Without comment, Ethan steadied her, his arm a solid support around her shoulders. He led her carefully through the barn, pausing to grab a second lantern before pushing open the door to face the storm once more. "It's not far," he assured her, raising his voice over the wind. "Just hold on to me." The walk to the house was a blur of swirling white and biting cold. Eliza focused only on putting one foot in front of the other, grateful for the sturdy presence beside her. Then suddenly they were on a porch, and Ethan was opening a door, ushering her into blessed warmth. The cabin was simple but neat: a single large room with a stone fireplace at one end, a small kitchen area, a table with 2 chairs, and a bed in the corner. A fire burned cheerfully in the hearth, casting dancing light across the wooden walls. Compared to the barn, it was paradise. "Sit by the fire," Ethan instructed, guiding her to a chair pulled close to the flames. "I'll make some coffee. When did you last eat?" The question made Eliza realize just how hungry she was. "This morning," she admitted. "I left in a hurry." Ethan's mouth tightened slightly, but he asked no questions. Instead, he moved to the stove, where a pot of something savory smelling simmered. "I've got stew," he said. "Nothing fancy, but it's hot." While he busied himself with food, Eliza took the opportunity to study him more carefully. He moved with an easy confidence around the small space, his movements economical and practiced. His dark hair curled slightly at the nape of his neck, and despite the harshness of frontier life, there was a gentleness to his hands as he ladled stew into a bowl. "Here," he said, placing the bowl and a spoon before her. "Eat slowly. Your stomach needs to remember what food is." The stew was simple: beef, potatoes, and carrots in a rich broth, but to Eliza, it was the finest meal she'd ever tasted. She forced herself to eat slowly as instructed, savoring each bite as warmth spread through her from the inside out. Ethan sat across from her, a respectful distance away, sipping his coffee and watching her with a thoughtful expression. He didn't press her for information, and Eliza was grateful for the reprieve. She wasn't ready to tell her story, to see the judgment that would inevitably follow. "You can take the bed," he said when she had finished eating. "I'll sleep on the floor by the fire." Eliza shook her head. "I can't put you out of your bed. The floor is fine for me." "Madam," Ethan said firmly, "I don't know your story and you don't have to tell it, but I can see you're in a delicate condition and you've been through enough today without sleeping on a hard floor. Take the bed, please." Too exhausted to argue further, Eliza nodded. "Just for tonight," she conceded, "and my name is Eliza, Eliza Turner." "Miss Turner," he acknowledged with a slight nod. "Get some rest. We can figure things out in the morning." Eliza didn't remember falling asleep, but she must have, because the next thing she knew, pale winter sunlight was streaming through the cabin's small windows. She lay still for a moment, disoriented, before the events of the previous day came rushing back. Her family's rejection, the storm. The barn. Ethan Ryder, speaking of whom Eliza propped herself up on one elbow, looking around the cabin. Ethan was nowhere to be seen, but a small fire still burned in the hearth, and a pot of coffee sat warming on the stove. Her clothes, which had been damp with snow, were now dry and folded neatly on a chair beside the bed. She dressed quickly, grateful for the privacy. As she smoothed her hands over her dress, she felt the firm roundness of her belly beneath the fabric. The baby moved, a gentle flutter that reminded her she wasn't truly alone. The door opened, and Ethan stepped inside, bringing with him a blast of cold air and the scent of morning. He carried an armload of firewood, which he deposited beside the hearth before turning to her. "You're awake," he observed. "How are you feeling?" "Better," Eliza said, surprised to find it was true. While she was still sore and tired, the bone-deep cold had left her and the food and rest had done wonders. "Thank you for your kindness." Ethan nodded, removing his hat and hanging it on a peg by the door. Storms passed, but it left about a foot of snow behind. Roads won't be passable for a day or two. He paused, studying her. "I don't mean to pry, but do you have somewhere to go when they are?" The question hung in the air between them. Eliza looked down at her hands, twisting them in her lap. "No," she admitted finally. "I don't." Ethan didn't seem surprised. "I thought as much," he said, not unkindly. "Well, you're welcome to stay here until you figure something out." "It's not much, but there's food and shelter." Eliza's eyes widened in surprise. "You do that. You don't even know me." "I know enough," he replied. "You're in trouble and I've got room. Seems simple to me." It was far from simple, and they both knew it. A single man taking in a pregnant, unmarried woman would raise eyebrows in any community, but especially in a small frontier town where gossip was as necessary as bread. Yet the alternative, being alone, with winter at its height and a baby on the way, was unthinkable. "I can work," Eliza offered. "I can cook, clean, so whatever you need. I won't be a burden." Ethan's expression softened slightly. "Let's not worry about all that just yet. For now, just rest and get your strength back." The next few days fell into an unexpectedly comfortable rhythm. The snow kept them largely isolated at the small ranch, which sat about 3 miles outside the town of Whitefish, Montana. Ethan spent most daylight hours tending to his livestock, a small herd of cattle, 4 horses, and a few chickens, while Eliza, against his initial protests, took over the domestic duties of the cabin. It was a fair arrangement, she insisted. She needed to earn her keep, and besides, the work kept her mind from dwelling too much on all she had lost. She found a quiet satisfaction in making the simple cabin more homelike, scrubbing the floors, organizing the kitchen supplies, and preparing meals more varied than Ethan's usual fare of stew and coffee. They spoke little at first, each careful to maintain a respectful distance. But as days stretched into a week, the silence between them grew more comfortable, punctuated increasingly by conversation over meals or in the evenings by the fire. Ethan, she learned, had come west 5 years earlier at the age of 22, leaving behind a failing family farm in Ohio. He'd worked cattle drives and as a ranch hand before saving enough to buy this small spread a year ago. He lived alone, had never married, and seemed content with his solitary existence, or had been, until now. For her part, Eliza shared carefully edited versions of her own past her childhood on her family's ranch 20 miles east, her education at the local schoolhouse, her love of books and music. She didn't mention her pregnancy or the circumstances that had led to her current situation, and Ethan didn't ask. But the unspoken reality hung between them, growing more obvious with each passing day as her condition became impossible to ignore. It was on a cold morning in early March, nearly 3 weeks after her arrival, that Eliza finally broached the subject. They sat at the small table, sharing a breakfast of cornbread and eggs. Outside, the world was beginning to thaw, patches of muddy earth appearing between the melting snowdrifts. "I should leave soon," she said abruptly, setting down her fork. "Before the spring work begins in earnest, I've been thinking about trying my luck in Missoula. It's a bigger town, I might find work there." Ethan looked up sharply. "What kind of work do you think you'll find?" He asked, his voice carefully neutral. Eliza lifted her chin. "I can sew or cook. Perhaps a boarding house would hire me. In your condition," he said it without judgment, merely stating a fact they had both been avoiding. "I have to do something," Eliza said, her voice rising slightly. "I can't stay here indefinitely. People will talk." "Let them talk," Ethan said with unexpected force. Then, more gently, "Eliza, I'm not trying to keep you here against your will. If you want to go to Missoula or anywhere else, I won't stop you. But don't rush off because you think you're a burden or because you're worried about my reputation." "It's not just your reputation I'm concerned about," Eliza admitted, resting a hand on her belly. "This child deserves better than to be born to a mother with no name, no family, no place in the world." A long silence followed her words. Ethan seemed to be considering something, his brow furrowed in thought. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet but steady. "What if there was another option?" he said. "What if you stayed?" Eliza stared at him, not understanding. "I've already imposed on your hospitality far too long, not as a guest," Ethan interrupted. "As my wife." The word hung in the air between them, shocking in its simplicity. Eliza could only stare, certain she had misheard. "Your wife," she repeated incredulously. Ethan met her gaze steadily. "It would be a practical arrangement," he said. "You need a home and a name for your child. I need someone to help run this place. We get along well enough. Many marriages have been built on less." "But the child isn't yours," Eliza protested. "Why would you take on another man's responsibility?" "The child isn't to blame for the circumstances of its conception," Ethan said firmly. "And neither are you, whatever your family might think." Tears sprang to Eliza's eyes at the unexpected kindness in his words. "You don't know what happened," she whispered. "I don't need to," Ethan replied, "but if you want to tell me, I'll listen." And so, for the first time, Eliza told her story about Thomas, the charming drifter who had worked briefly at her father's ranch the previous summer. How he had courted her with sweet words and promises of a future together. How she had given herself to him, believing they would marry. How he had left suddenly, claiming he was going to make his fortune in the gold fields and would send for her, but no word had ever come. How her parents had discovered her condition and, in their strict religious fury, had cast her out rather than bear the shame of an unwed daughter with child. Throughout her tale, Ethan listened without interruption, his expression grave. When she finished, he reached across the table and, after a moment's hesitation, placed his hand over hers. "I meant what I said," he told her. "The offer stands, but I understand if you need time to think about it." Eliza looked at their hands, his large and work roughened, hers small and pale beneath it. She barely knew this man, yet he had shown her more kindness in 3 weeks than her own family had in her moment of greatest need. Was that enough to build a life on? She didn't love him not the way she had loved Thomas, with all the passionate intensity of first love, but perhaps that was for the best. Love had led her astray before. Perhaps respect, kindness, and practical necessity were a firmer foundation. "I don't need time," she said finally. "If you're certain this is what you want, then yes, I'll marry you, Ethan Ryder." The relief on his face was unmistakable, though he tried to hide it behind a businesslike nod. "Good," he said. "That's good. We can ride into town tomorrow, speak to the preacher." And just like that, Eliza's future changed course once again. The wedding was a simple affair, held in the small white church in Whitefish on a clear, cold March morning. The witnesses were people Ethan knew from town, the general store owner and his wife, the blacksmith, and a few neighboring ranchers who expressed varying degrees of surprise at Ethan's sudden matrimonial plans. If they noticed Eliza's condition beneath her loose-fitting dress, they were too polite or too curious about the gossip to follow to mention it. The preacher, a kind-faced man named Reverend Johnson, performed the ceremony with dignity and without questions, though Eliza caught a knowing look in his eyes when he glanced at her midsection. She kept her head high, her hand steady in Ethan's as they exchanged their vows. "I now pronounce you man and wife," the Reverend declared, and just like that, Eliza Turner became Eliza Ryder. It was strange how a few simple words could change everything and nothing all at once. They celebrated with a meal at the town's small hotel restaurant, a luxury that made Eliza uncomfortable, until Ethan assured her that a man was entitled to treat his bride to something special on their wedding day. She wore the simple gold band he had purchased from the general store, turning it on her finger, still unused to its weight and significance. The ride back to the ranch, their ranch now, she supposed was quiet, each lost in their own thoughts about the step they had taken. The early spring air was crisp but not bitter, and the land was coming alive again after winter's long sleep. New green shoots peeked through the melting snow and birds called to each other from the trees. "Are you all right?" Ethan asked as they approached the cabin, breaking the long silence between them. Eliza nodded. "Yes, it's just strange. Yesterday I was Miss Turner with no family and no future. Today I'm Mrs. Ryder with a husband and a home. "And tomorrow?" Ethan asked, a hint of uncertainty in his voice. Eliza managed a smile. "Tomorrow we begin our life together, I suppose, whatever that means." What it meant in practice was very little change to their daily routines. Ethan continued his work with the livestock, now with the added tasks of spring planting to prepare for. Eliza maintained the household, cooking and cleaning with the efficiency that came from years of training in her mother's kitchen. The only significant change was in their sleeping arrangements. On their wedding night, Ethan had insisted on maintaining his place on the floor near the fire, despite Eliza's protests that a husband had certain rights. "This isn't that kind of marriage," he had said firmly. "Not unless you want it to be, and even then not until after." He hadn't finished the sentence, but his meaning was clear: not until after the baby came. It was a consideration Eliza hadn't expected, and it both relieved and confused her. Part of her had assumed that physical intimacy would be expected, a duty to be performed in exchange for the security he offered. The fact that Ethan made no such demands both elevated him in her esteem and left her wondering about his motivations. As March gave way to April, and Eliza's pregnancy advanced into its 8th month, the questions she had been avoiding became more pressing. One evening, as they sat by the fire after dinner, Eliza mending a shirt, Ethan cleaning his rifle, she finally found the courage to ask. "Ethan," she began, setting her sewing aside, "why did you really marry me?" He looked up, his hands stilling on the gun barrel. "I told you why. It was a practical arrangement for both of us." "Yes, but—" Eliza hesitated, searching for the right words. Most men wouldn't consider a pregnant woman with no family or dowry a practical choice. They would see only the burden, not the benefit. Ethan was quiet for a long moment, his eyes fixed on the fire. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, almost reluctant. "When I was 16, he said, "my older sister found herself in a similar situation to yours. The man responsible refused to marry her. My father," he broke off, his jaw tightening at the memory. "My father threw her out, told her not to come back until she had rid herself of her shame." Eliza's breath caught. "What happened to her?" "She went to Columbus, found work in a factory. The conditions were not good. She died in childbirth, alone in a boarding house. The baby, too." Ethan's voice was flat, but Eliza could hear the old pain beneath the words. "I was too young to help her then, too afraid to stand up to my father. I've regretted that every day since." Understanding dawned on Eliza. "So when you found me—" "I saw a chance to do what I couldn't do for Mary," he admitted. "But that's not the only reason. You're a good woman, Eliza. Strong, kind, you deserve better than what life has handed you so far." Tears pricked at Eliza's eyes. "I'm sorry about your sister," she said softly. Ethan nodded, acknowledging her sympathy. "I'm sorry about your family," he returned. "They're fools to throw away a daughter like you." The words warmed something in Eliza that had been cold since that terrible day in February. She reached across the space between them, and for the first time since their wedding day, took Ethan's hand in hers. His fingers closed around hers, strong and warm. "Thank you," she said simply. "For everything." The baby came in early May, on a night when spring thunderstorms rolled across the Montana sky. Ethan had ridden for the midwife in town as soon as Eliza's labor began, returning with a stern, capable woman named Mrs. Holloway, who shooed him out of the cabin with instructions to wait in the barn until called. The labor was long and difficult. Eliza, despite her fear, refused to cry out, biting down on a folded piece of cloth as pain tore through her body. Mrs. Holloway worked efficiently, her experienced hands guiding the process with calm authority. Outside, the thunder crashed and rain lashed at the windows, as if nature itself were participating in the drama of birth. Just as dawn was breaking, a new cry joined the sounds of the storm, the lusty wail of a healthy baby boy. Mrs. Holloway cleaned and swaddled the infant before placing him in Eliza's trembling arms. "He's perfect," the midwife pronounced. "Strong lungs, good color. You did well, Mrs. Ryder." Eliza gazed down at her son, overwhelmed by the rush of love that flooded through her. He had a shock of dark hair, and when he briefly opened his eyes, they were a deep blue. They would probably change color in time, she knew, but for now they reminded her of the Montana sky just after sunset. "I'll get your husband," Mrs. Holloway said, wiping her hands on her apron. "He's probably worn a path in the barn floor by now." Minutes later, Ethan entered the cabin, his face drawn with worry. He approached the bed cautiously, as if afraid of what he might find. When he saw Eliza propped up against the pillows, tired but smiling, with the bundle in her arms, visible relief washed over his features. "Come meet your son," Eliza said softly. Ethan's eyes widened at the word son, a complex emotion flitting across his face. He came closer, peering down at the infant with a mixture of awe and uncertainty. "Would you like to hold him?" Eliza asked. Ethan hesitated. "I've never held a baby before," he admitted. "Neither had I until a few minutes ago," Eliza said with a small laugh. "Sit beside me and I'll show you how to support his head." Gingerly, as if handling the most fragile treasure in the world, Ethan took the baby from her. The contrast of the tiny form against his strong, work-roughened hands created an image that tugged at Eliza's heart. For a long moment, he simply stared at the child, his expression softening in a way she had never seen before. "What will you name him?" he asked finally. Eliza had been pondering this question for months. She had considered naming the baby after her father or grandfather, but those connections seemed severed now. Then she had thought about Thomas, but that name carried too much pain and betrayal. "I was thinking William," she said. "After my mother's father, he was a kind man, but—" She hesitated. "I thought perhaps his middle name could be Ethan, if that's all right with you." Ethan looked up from the baby, surprise and something deeper in his eyes. "You would name him after me. You've given him your name already," Eliza pointed out. "He'll be William Ethan Ryder, but only if you approve." "I approve," Ethan said, his voice rough with emotion. He looked back down at the baby at William with a new intensity. "Hello, William Ethan Ryder," he said softly. "Welcome to the world." In that moment, something shifted between them. A connection formed not just through the legal bonds of marriage or the practical arrangement they had agreed upon, but through this small life they now shared responsibility for. Watching Ethan with her son, Eliza felt the first stirrings of something she had not expected to feel again, the tender beginnings of love. The weeks following William's birth were a blur of exhaustion and adjustment for the new family. The baby proved to have a healthy appetite and a strong set of lungs, demanding attention at all hours of the day and night. Eliza, recovering from childbirth while trying to maintain her household duties, was often on the verge of collapse by evening. Ethan, to her surprise, took an active interest in the baby from the start. He wasn't skilled at changing cloths or soothing cries, but he was eager to learn, watching carefully as Eliza demonstrated and then trying himself, his large hands comically gentle with the tiny infant. In the evenings, he would often take William after dinner, carrying him around the cabin and talking to him in a low, serious voice about ranch matters, as if the baby could understand every word. "He's going to think cattle prices are the most important thing in the world," Eliza remarked one evening, smiling at the sight. Ethan looked up from his pacing circuit. "A man should understand his livelihood from an early age," he replied with mock solemnity. Then, more seriously, "I want him to know everything I know, to be prepared for life." As his father, Eliza asked softly. It was a loaded question. Though legally William was Ethan's son, they had never explicitly discussed how Ethan would view his relationship with the child. Ethan met her gaze steadily. "Yes," he said, "as his father, if that's acceptable to you." Eliza felt a lump form in her throat. "More than acceptable," she managed. "It's what I would wish for him, for both of you." Ethan nodded, a silent understanding passing between them. He resumed his pacing, but now his monologue to the baby had shifted. "And someday, William," he was saying, "I'll teach you to ride. Every rider man needs to be at home in the saddle." As spring ripened into summer, life at the Ryder Ranch settled into a new routine. William grew quickly, his features becoming more defined with each passing week. To Eliza's relief, he seemed to have inherited her coloring rather than Thomas's dark hair and eyes that had indeed changed from their newborn blue to a warm brown. Ethan remarked once that the baby had Eliza's smile, and she had been oddly touched by the observation. The ranch itself was thriving under their combined efforts. Ethan's small herd had increased with the spring calving, and the vegetable garden Eliza had planted behind the cabin was yielding a bountiful harvest. They weren't wealthy by any means, but they were comfortable, with enough to put aside a small amount for the future William's future, as Ethan was careful to specify. Their relationship, too, was evolving. The initial awkwardness of their arranged marriage had gradually given way to a comfortable companionship. They worked well together, anticipating each other's needs and respecting each other's spaces. Eliza found herself looking forward to their evening conversations by the fire. When the day's work was done and William was asleep in the cradle Ethan had crafted for him. Yet there remained an unspoken boundary between them. Ethan still slept on a pallet near the hearth, despite Eliza's increasingly frequent hints that the arrangement was unnecessary. She had come to admire her husband deeply, his integrity, his gentleness with William, his quiet strength. And if she was honest with herself, she was drawn to him physically as well. The sight of him working shirtless in the summer heat, muscles flexing as he repaired fences or hauled water, had begun to affect her in ways that left her blushing and confused. But Ethan maintained his distance, treating her with unfailing respect but never indicating that he might desire more than their current arrangement. Eliza began to wonder if perhaps he simply didn't find her attractive. After all, her body had changed with childbirth, and she was often tired and disheveled from the demands of motherhood and ranch work. The question was settled unexpectedly one hot July evening. William, now 3 months old, had finally fallen asleep after a fussy day. Eliza, exhausted but too warm to rest, had decided to take advantage of the full moon and wash her hair outside where the night air might cool her. She filled a basin with water from the pump and, sitting on the bench behind the cabin, loosened her long dark hair from its practical bun. She was just pouring water over her head, eyes closed against the cascade, when she heard the crunch of boots on gravel. Her eyes flew open to find Ethan standing a few yards away, frozen in mid-step, his expression unreadable in the moonlight. "I'm sorry," he said stiffly, beginning to turn away. "I didn't mean to intrude." "You're not intruding," Eliza said quickly, reaching for the towel she had brought out. "It's your home too." Ethan remained where he was, seemingly uncertain whether to advance or retreat. Eliza could feel his gaze on her as she toweled her hair, aware suddenly of how the water had made her thin summer dress cling to her body, outlining curves that were usually concealed by more practical clothing. "Was there something you needed?" she asked when the silence stretched too long. Ethan cleared his throat. "I just wanted to tell you that I fixed that loose board on the porch. You won't trip on it anymore." "Thank you," Eliza said, smiling at the thoughtfulness. It was so typical of Ethan, noticing the small things that would make her life easier without being asked. He nodded, still not moving. The moonlight silvered his features, emphasizing the strong line of his jaw and the breadth of his shoulders. He looked almost otherworldly, like a figure from one of the mythology books Eliza had loved as a girl. "Ethan," she said suddenly, gathering her courage, "are you happy with our arrangement?" The question seemed to catch him off guard. "What do you mean, our marriage?" Eliza clarified. "The way things are between us, are you satisfied with it?" Ethan was quiet for so long that Eliza began to regret asking. Then, with deliberate steps, he closed the distance between them, sitting beside her on the bench. He didn't touch her, but she could feel the warmth radiating from his body in the cool night air. "Are you?" he asked instead of answering. Eliza took a deep breath. "I'm grateful for everything you've done for William and me," she began carefully. "You've given us a home, security, a future, but I wonder sometimes if..." "If what?" Ethan prompted when she trailed off. "If we might have more," she finished, her voice barely above a whisper. "If we might be a true husband and wife in all ways." Ethan's breathing changed, becoming slightly faster. "Eliza," he said, her name rough in his throat. "I've wanted that since the first moment I saw you in my barn." But I didn't want you to feel obligated, to think that my kindness came with expectations. Relief and desire flooded through her in equal measure. It's not obligation, she assured him. It's want. I want you, Ethan Ryder. His control, so carefully maintained for months, seemed to snap at her words. With a groan, he pulled her to him, his mouth finding hers in a kiss that started tentative but quickly blazed into something hungry and desperate. Eliza responded with equal fervor, her hands clutching at his shoulders, his hair anywhere she could reach. When they finally broke apart, both breathing heavily, Ethan rested his forehead against hers. "Are you sure?" he asked, his voice strained with the effort of restraint. In answer, Eliza stood, holding out her hand to him. Together, they walked back to the cabin, to the bed that would finally, truly be theirs. The change in their relationship transformed the Ryder household in subtle but significant ways. The tension that had hummed beneath the surface of their interactions dissolved, replaced by a comfortable intimacy that manifested in small touches, private smiles, and the unspoken language of a couple truly united. Ethan became more demonstrative, less reserved in showing his affection for both Eliza and William. Eliza found herself humming as she worked around the cabin, a contentment she had never expected to feel again warming her from within. As summer waned and the first hints of autumn touched the Montana landscape, they received an unexpected visitor. Eliza was in the yard, hanging laundry to dry in the September sun while William napped in his cradle nearby when she heard the approach of a wagon. Setting down her basket, she shaded her eyes against the glare, trying to identify the visitor. The wagon was driven by a woman, which was unusual enough to make Eliza curious. As it drew closer, she realized with a shock that she recognized the stern figure at the reins. It was her mother, Harriet Turner. Eliza's heart began to pound. She hadn't heard a word from her family since that terrible February day. She had written once, after William's birth, sending the letter via the general store in town with instructions to deliver it to the Turner ranch. No reply had come. The wagon stopped in the yard, and Harriet Turner descended with the stiff dignity that had always characterized her. She was a tall woman, her once dark hair now streaked with gray, her face lined with years of frontier hardship. She had been beautiful once, before life and disappointment had etched permanent furrows between her brows. "Mother," Eliza said, finding her voice with difficulty, "this is unexpected." Harriet looked her up and down, taking in the simple dress, the capable hands roughened by work, the healthy flush in her cheeks. Her gaze then moved to the cradle under the tree, and something flickered in her expression, regret, perhaps, or simple curiosity. "You look well," she said finally. "I am well," Eliza confirmed. "We are well. This is my son, William." Harriet approached the cradle cautiously, peering down at the sleeping infant. William's cheeks were flushed with sleep, his little fists curled beside his head. "He favors you," Harriet observed, "around the eyes and mouth." "Yes," Eliza agreed, wondering what had prompted this visit after months of silence. "Mother, why are you here?" Harriet straightened, clasping her hands before her. "I received your letter," she said. "I would have come sooner, but your father." She trailed off, then squared her shoulders. "Your father doesn't know I'm here. He's in Bud on business for a few days." "I see," Eliza said, understanding immediately. Her father's anger still burned hot then. "Some things never changed. I heard in town that you had married," Harriet continued. "A rancher named Ryder. They say he's a decent man." "More than decent," Eliza said firmly. "Ethan is a good husband and a good father to William." Harriet's eyebrows rose slightly at this. "He knows the child isn't his." "Of course he knows," Eliza replied, a flash of anger warming her cheeks. "Ethan doesn't live in a world of pretense and appearances. He accepts things as they are and deals with them honestly." The implied criticism wasn't lost on Harriet. Her mouth tightened, but she didn't rise to the bait. Instead, she reached into the pocket of her coat and withdrew a small package wrapped in cloth. "I brought this for the baby," she said, holding it out. "It was yours once. I saved it, thinking someday you might have a daughter to pass it to, but a grandson is just as precious." Eliza unwrapped the bundle to find a silver rattle, tarnished with age but still beautiful. She remembered it from her own childhood, a gift from her maternal grandmother, one of the few fine things her family had brought west with them. "Thank you," she said, genuine gratitude in her voice. "It's kind of you to think of him." Harriet nodded, then glanced around the neat yard, the well-maintained cabin, the signs of prosperity modest but evident. "You've made a home here," she observed. "Yes," Eliza agreed, "a happy one." A silence fell between them, heavy with all the things unsaid, the hurt of rejection, the months of separation, the stubborn pride on both sides. "Will you come in?" Eliza offered finally. "Have some coffee. Ethan will be back from the north pasture soon." Harriet hesitated, then shook her head. "I should get back. It's a long drive, and I need to be home before dark." Disappointment settled in Eliza's chest, but she nodded her understanding. Some bridges, it seemed, would take longer to rebuild than others. Another time, perhaps. "Perhaps," Harriet agreed, though whether it was a real promise or mere politeness was hard to tell. She turned to go, then paused. "Eliza," she said, not quite looking at her daughter, "I'm glad you found your way. I worry about you, you know, even when Father forbade my name to be spoken." Eliza supplied quietly. Harriet's silence was answer enough. She climbed back onto the wagon, gathering the reins. "Take care of that boy," she said, "and yourself." "I will," Eliza promised. "We're in good hands here." As the wagon pulled away, William stirred in his cradle, letting out a small cry that quickly escalated to a demanding wail. Eliza lifted him, cradling him against her shoulder as she watched her mother's wagon disappear down the road. She felt oddly calm, neither elated nor devastated by the brief reunion. It was a beginning, perhaps, or an ending. Time would tell. She was still standing there, gently bouncing William, when Ethan rode into the yard a short while later. He dismounted quickly, his brow furrowing in concern as he approached. "Was that Harriet Turner's wagon I passed on the road?" he asked without preamble. Eliza nodded. "My mother came to visit, briefly." Ethan's expression darkened. "Did she upset you? What did she want?" "To see her grandson, I think," Eliza said, looking down at William, who had settled against her shoulder. "And perhaps to see for herself that I was all right." "And are you?" Ethan asked, stepping closer, his hand coming to rest protectively on the small of her back. "All right, I mean." Eliza considered the question. The pain of her family's rejection had dulled over the months, replaced by the joy of her new life with Ethan and William. Her mother's visit had reopened the wound slightly, but it didn't ache as sharply as before. "Yes," she said, leaning into her husband's solid warmth. "I'm better than all right. I'm home." Ethan's arm tightened around her and he pressed a kiss to her temple. "Yes, you are," he agreed, "and nothing and no one is going to change that." The certainty in his voice settled over Eliza like a blanket, warm and secure. Whatever bridges might be rebuilt with her family in the future, her foundation was here now with this man and this child. It was enough, more than enough. As autumn deepened into winter, the Ryder ranch prepared for the coming cold. The harvest had been good, the larder was full, and the livestock healthy. William, now 7 months old, was crawling energetically around the cabin, pulling himself up on furniture and babbling a constant stream of sounds that sometimes almost resembled words. Ethan had added a room to the cabin, a project he had worked on through the fall, wanting William to have his own space as he grew. Eliza had sewn curtains for the small window and a quilt for the crib that would eventually replace the cradle. Life wasn't without its challenges. A harsh early snowstorm in November threatened some of the livestock, requiring Ethan to spend 2 nights in the barn with the most vulnerable animals. A bout of croup sent William into a frightening coughing fit that had Eliza pacing the floor with him for 3 nights straight. Money was always a concern, with every penny carefully accounted for and saved where possible. But these trials only seemed to strengthen the bonds between them. Eliza discovered a resilience in herself she hadn't known she possessed, and a depth to Ethan that continued to surprise and impress her. Their partnership, begun as a practical arrangement, had blossomed into something neither had dared to hope for, a true marriage, founded on mutual respect and growing love. December brought preparations for William's first Christmas. Ethan cut a small pine tree from their land and set it up in the corner of the cabin. Eliza decorated it with homemade ornaments, paper stars, strings of dried berries, small cloth animals she had sewn in odd moments. William was fascinated by the tree, constantly trying to crawl toward it and grab the lowest decorations, much to his parents' amusement. "He's determined, I'll give him that," Ethan remarked one evening, scooping the baby up before he could reach the tree again. "Like his father," Eliza teased, looking up from the small wooden horse she was wrapping as William's Christmas gift. Ethan had carved it himself, spending hours getting the details just right. Ethan laughed, settling William on his knee. "I prefer to think of it as perseverance. A valuable trait in Montana." "Well, he comes by it honestly then," Eliza said, smiling at the sight of them together, the man who had become the center of her world and the child who was its greatest joy. Later that night, with William finally asleep and the cabin quiet except for the crackling of the fire, Ethan drew Eliza onto his lap in the rocking chair he had recently built for her. "I have something for you," he said, reaching into his pocket. "An early Christmas gift." "Ethan, we agreed to keep things simple this year," Eliza protested, though curiosity made her eyes bright. The new chair was more than enough. "This didn't cost anything," he assured her, placing a small envelope in her hands. "Open it." Intrigued, Eliza broke the seal and withdrew a single sheet of paper. As she read the neat legal handwriting, her breath caught. "This is—" She began, unable to finish. "Adoption papers," Ethan confirmed. "I spoke to Judge Wilson in town last week. If you sign, William will be legally my son in every way. He'll have all the rights of a natural-born child, including inheritance." Tears filled Eliza's eyes. Though Ethan had been acting as William's father in every practical sense since his birth, this legal step represented a commitment that went beyond daily care and affection. It was a public declaration, a permanent binding. "You've already given him so much," Eliza said, her voice thick with emotion. "Your name, your home, your love. And I want him to have everything else I can give him," Ethan said simply. "I want there to be no question ever about his place in my life, in our life." Eliza looked at the man who had found her shivering in his barn less than a year ago, a stranger then, now the person she trusted most in the world, the person she loved with a depth and certainty she had never imagined possible. "There's a pen in the drawer," she said, wiping away tears. "Let me sign this right now." Christmas Day dawned clear and cold, the world outside the cabin transformed into a glittering white landscape. Eliza woke early, as was her habit, but instead of rising immediately, she allowed herself the luxury of lingering in the warmth of the bed, Ethan's arm a comforting weight around her waist. From William's room came the soft sounds of his stirring, not quite awake but getting there. This time last year, she had been in her childhood home, her pregnancy still a secret from her family, her heart heavy with worry about the future. She could never have imagined then the path her life would take, the loss and rejection, yes, but also the unexpected joy, the new beginning, the love she had found in the most unlikely of circumstances. Beside her, Ethan stirred, his arm tightening around her. "Merry Christmas," he murmured against her hair. Eliza turned in his embrace, facing him. In the early morning light filtering through the window, his features were soft with sleep, his usual alertness replaced by a rare vulnerability that never failed to touch her heart. "Merry Christmas," she returned, pressing a kiss to his lips. "Our first as a family," a smile spread across Ethan's face, crinkling the corners of his eyes. "The first of many," he promised. From the next room, William's stirring became more purposeful, small sounds of impatience signaling his desire for attention. Eliza made to rise, but Ethan stopped her with a gentle hand. "I'll get him," he said. "You stay warm." Eliza watched as her husband padded barefoot to their son's room, returning moments later with William in his arms. The baby was sleep-rumpled and rosy-cheeked, his dark eyes bright with curiosity as Ethan brought him to the bed. "Look who's ready for Christmas," Ethan said, laying William between them. The baby immediately reached for Eliza's hair, his favorite plaything. He has no idea what today is, Eliza laughed, freeing her hair from his grasp. But he knows something's different. He can sense the excitement. They lingered in bed longer than usual, playing with William, exchanging small kisses and quiet words of affection. Outside, the sun rose higher, turning the snow-covered landscape into a sea of diamonds. Inside, the small cabin was warm with love and the promise of the day to come. Later, after breakfast and the exchange of modest gifts, the wooden horse for William, a new shawl for Eliza, a leather-bound journal for Ethan, they bundled up against the cold for a walk to the ridge that overlooked their property. The air was crisp and clean, the sky a perfect Montana blue. William, wrapped snugly in blankets and held securely in Ethan's arms, looked around with wide-eyed wonder at the white world. At the top of the ridge, they paused, looking down at the cabin and barn, the fenced pastures, the small but growing herd of cattle dotting the landscape. It wasn't a grand spread by any means, but it was theirs and it was home. "I want to build something here," Ethan said suddenly, his breath forming clouds in the cold air. "A proper house eventually, with more rooms for the future." Eliza glanced at him, catching the meaning behind his words. "For more children?" she asked softly. Ethan nodded, a hint of uncertainty in his expression. "If that's something you'd want, someday." Eliza's heart swelled with love for this man who continued to surprise her with his generosity, his willingness to expand the boundaries of family beyond conventional limits. "I would like that," she said. "Very much." Relief and happiness washed over Ethan's face. He shifted William to one arm, pulling Eliza close with the other. Together, the three of them stood on the ridge, looking out over their land, their future stretched before them like the endless Montana sky. "When I found you in my barn," Ethan said quietly, "I thought I was just offering shelter from a storm I never imagined. That you were finding your family," Eliza finished for him. "That I was finding my heart," Ethan corrected, his voice rough with emotion. "It's been yours since that first night, though I didn't know it then." Eliza leaned into him, her own heart full to bursting. "And mine has been yours since you gave me back my dignity, my hope." She reached up to touch his face, feeling the familiar contours beneath her fingertips. "I love you, Ethan Ryder, with everything I am." "And I love you, Eliza Ryder," he returned, bending to kiss her as the winter sun shone down upon them, now and always. In his arms, William cooed happily, his small hand reaching out to touch the snowflakes that had begun to fall gently around them. His parents smiled, their hearts united in love for each other, and for this child who had brought them together, this family forged not by blood or convention, but by choice and commitment and the deepest kind of love. As they made their way back down the ridge toward their home, Eliza felt a profound sense of peace settle over her. The path that had led her here had been fraught with pain and uncertainty, but she wouldn't change a moment of it. For it had led her to this, to Ethan and William, to the life they were building together, to the love that had found her on a cold February night when she had nothing left but hope. And as the years passed, that love only grew stronger. The small cabin expanded into a proper house, filled with the laughter of children William and later his siblings. Sarah, born 2 years later, and twins Robert and James, who arrived 3 years after that. The ranch prospered under Ethan's careful management and Eliza's thrifty housekeeping. They were never wealthy in material terms, but they were rich in the ways that truly mattered. William grew into a fine young man with Ethan's integrity and Eliza's compassion. He never questioned his place in the family, secure in the knowledge that he was loved completely by the father who had chosen him and the mother who had fought for him from the beginning. When he was 16, Ethan took him aside and told him the truth of his birth, not as a secret or a shame, but as a testament to his mother's courage and his father's love. William had listened solemnly, then hugged them both, his affection unchanged by the revelation. Eliza's relationship with her family had healed gradually over time. Her mother became a regular visitor, and even her father eventually relented, his stubborn pride giving way to the desire to know his grandchildren. The first meeting had been tense. But William's obvious happiness and Ethan's steadfast support had gone a long way toward mending the rift. Through it all, the joys and sorrows, the triumphs and challenges that made up a life fully lived, Ethan and Eliza remained devoted to each other. Their love, born in the most unlikely of circumstances, proved stronger than any trial that came their way. On cold winter nights, when the wind howled outside and the children were tucked safely in their beds, they would sometimes sit by the fire and remember how it all began with a desperate young woman seeking shelter from a storm, and a lonely rancher who opened not just his barn door, but his heart. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't found me that night?" Eliza would ask, leaning against Ethan's shoulder, and he would always answer the same way, drawing her closer, his voice certain and true. "I don't believe in accidents, my love. I believe you were meant to find your way to me, just as I was meant to find you. Some things are simply written in the stars." And as they looked at each other in the firelight, both knew it was true. For in each other, they had found not just shelter from life's storms, but the very reason to weather them together, always together, bound by a love that had begun on a desperate night in a simple barn and had grown to encompass a lifetime of joy.